So in recognition of our traditional custodians of the lands and waterways, I'd like to acknowledge the First Peoples, traditional custodians of the Camaragal place where we are today. And I'd like to thank all the elders past and present for the continued custodianship of all the lands that ACU is on. So welcome today. We are doing a CoC. So we are doing a confirmation of candidature for Hamed here. He's going to introduce his topic very shortly, which I'll minimize the screen. On today, we thank the chair, Baljinder Sadra, and expert panelists Kim Foster and Joseph Sirachi. And Hamed is supervised by Teresa, Jesse, Emma, and Ryan. And it is recording. And can I ask everybody who's online just to turn to mute, please? And I think we're good to go.
Sorry, Kim said she cannot see the slides.
You can't see the slides, Kim? All right, give me 1 second. I'm going to try to stop sharing. Share again. So share the window, share the screen. Sorry, technology. Screen. How's that, Kim? Is that good for that?
Sorry, just had an issue with Teams. Yeah, it was just there was the overlay of your screen on top of the slides, but it's gone now.
Yeah, I had to minimize. Yeah, just had to do that for the intros. Now I've minimized it. Everyone can see it. All good. Yeah, turn around, and you might just need us to talk a little bit loud.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to my CoC presentation. And first, I should introduce myself to the panel. My name is Hamed, and I'm going to, in fact, present my CoC. And the title is Should I Stay or Should I Go? A Self-Determination Theory and Dual Process Model Perspective on Employee Turnover. Here is my thesis overview and the three studies that I will be discussing. In the first study, I will be exploring the dual process model of employee turnover, a systematic review and a meta-analytical approach. In the second study, I will follow, in fact, the study and the, in fact, findings from, let's say, the meta-analysis using data sets of the Federal Employment Viewpoint Survey for studying and analyzing the bright and dark paths of employee turnover. And in the third study, I will try to link, in fact, the job demand resource model to the dual SDT, in fact, process model. What I am, in fact, going to do in my thesis is that I'm focusing on turnover intention. And we want to, in fact, decrease turnover intention in organizations. We know that in organizations, in fact, they are trying in order to support needs, increase need satisfaction, and increase, in fact, autonomous motivation. However, we know that this is not the only path that exists in organizations, although we have, in fact, let's say, rich literature for this. We know that there are management practices that are thwarting needs, increasing, in fact, needs frustration, leading to control, in fact, motivation that increases turnover intention. Simply, the question is that, is the dark path variable increasing turnover intention with more, let's say, is more influential on turnover intention than the bright path variables are, in fact, trying to reduce it? And then I will be answering this question in the first study using a meta-analysis. And in the second study, I will use a large data set of the Federal Employment Viewpoint Survey using data analysis and data science techniques. And in the third study, in fact, I will be asking this question, that what happens that organizations tend to impose controlling strategies and, in fact, implement dark path variables. And for that question, we are hypothesizing that when organizations cannot balance, in fact, between, let's say, job demand and job resources, they try to fill the gap by imposing controlling strategies. This is, in fact, generally what I am going to do in my thesis. What is employee turnover? In fact, voluntarily quitting or termination of the job by an employee. We call this, in fact, here employee turnover. And we see in the literature that this problem is, in fact, receiving much attention in different industries because the problem is seen to be very severe in healthcare, education, construction, mining, and so on. At least in IPPE, we know from the school leader, in fact, survey that we are doing in the year 2023, 56% of the, in fact, participants reported some levels of turnover intention, which is a very high and significant figure. And why, in fact, employee turnover is important because, in fact, it troubles organization. It's difficult to substitute an employee. It needs time and it may incur some cost. And more importantly, when you have high turnover intention in organizations, the problem is that you know that the well-being at your workplace is troubled, and it means that the organization productivity is in danger. But why are we going to, in fact, apply SDT in our study? In fact, we all know about SDT, but simply we can say that we need motivation to move and move others around us. And for motivation, we need autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And SDT is the, in fact, framework that provides and guides us to optimize, in fact, worker motivation by considering work context that can, in fact, influence basic psychological needs. So the reason that I am going to use, in fact, SDT is that SDT helps both the organization and the employee by linking these two through the motivation. In fact, it increases well-being to increase motivation, and the motivation increases the productivity and, in fact, let's say the success of the organization. So it will be, in fact, more conceivable for organization in order to hear that they are going to focus and invest on a thing that, in fact, benefits them significantly. And here are the research gaps, in fact, introduced by the CSL 2017. We know that SDT has got considerable, in fact, research gaps to study work organizations, including workplace thwarts and frustration of needs, pays and rewards, measures of autonomy and controlled motivation, various pay contingencies to motivation. Also, thinking about management practices is very important. We know there are different programs in organizations, but we have not assessed how they are affecting, in fact, SDT and also the outcomes such as turnover intention, and also advanced technologies, simply, in fact, saying the remote works and remote option of working and so on. There are important, let's say, topics that we can research in this area. So we are, in fact, emphasizing on bright path and the dark path. In organizations, what is expected, as we see in the literature, supporting needs should increase need satisfaction, leading to autonomous motivation increase, and leading to lower turnover intention. But the problem is that it's not the only path that is happening in the real world. And we have got in many organizations some, let's say, management practices and, let's say, policies that are thwarting needs. And these, let's say, thwarting, in fact, ends to needs frustration and controlled motivation that increases turnover intention. So here is the question. Are the dark path variables stronger than the bright path variables? To answer this question, we are going to look at the literature and also explain some concepts that are related to our topic from system thinking. From the literature, we know that positive variables link to positive outcomes strongly and negative variables link negative outcomes strongly. As we see in the research by CoC et al. 2023, need satisfaction more strongly enhanced work engagement, while need frustration was more strongly associated with exhaustion. Similarly, in fact, in parental style studies, we see SDT dual process model claims that parental autonomy support relates positively to child well-being, while controlling parenting is linked positively to child ill-being. So about the system thinking, we have a well-known, in fact, archetype, which is saying that, which is called the shifting the burden archetype. And it says that more symptomatic solutions cause more side effects, weaken fundamental solutions, and intensify adverse effects. When we have adverse workplace outcomes, such as turnover intention in organizations, we tend and we are planning to apply, in fact, bright path strategies. But the problem is that finding the best practices need time. And after that, we implemented them to reduce the, in fact, adverse workplace outcomes. Still, we are in fact, in, let's say, shorter time, and we need to give it time to take effect. But organizations mostly are under the pressure and under the burden, and they, in fact, apply dark path variables in order to relieve the pain of the problem as soon as they can. But we are mostly unaware of the side effects that in our problem that would be the needs thwarted and needs frustration. And this needs frustration decreases the power of us in applying the bright path strategies. Just a very simple question might be that when in an organization you have so many latecomers, so the reason might be that they are not motivated, they're demotivated. But you can do two things. You can find some, let's say, practices in order to increase motivation, but simply you can, in fact, enforce very strict shift controls. They do, in fact, gain something when they do the shift controls in the short term, but they are unaware of the fact that it is increasing the needs frustration. And in the long term, you will have more difficulty in order to handle the reinforced, demotivated, in fact, employees. What is my thesis saying is simply that, okay, let's assess your practices and stop the dark path variables so that the bright path factors and variables can take effect. And this is the model that we are going to test, but this will in fact make up my study 1 and 2, that I am going to test this through a meta-analytical approach in the first study and a data science-based approach, data analysis approach in the second study. But for the third study, I am in fact thinking about a question that, why does it happen? Why do organizations tend to apply dark path strategies and increase dark path variables? To answering that question, I would in fact hypothesize that when organizations cannot balance between job resources and demands, they try to fill the gap by imposing controlling strategies and dark path variables. So why am I in fact having such a hypothesis? I know from the literature, MED 2024 reported based on the same, in fact, FEVS data. They said that imbalanced workload in public servants organizations during the COVID led organizations to neglect training. They neglected training to, in fact, health workers because of saying that we don't have, in fact, enough workforce to come up with the COVID and the high workload. And it led to higher turnover in tension. So this was a hint in order to go through it and see if the JDR, in fact, imbalance leads to, in fact, intensifying the dark path variables. And of course, from the previous studies, we know that the JDR and STT are linked together. In the positive sense, we can say that, in fact, when we have workloads, we can, in fact, buffer the effects of the workload by giving it autonomy, by increasing autonomy of employees. So it will be rational in order to link JDR, STT, and dual process model in a study and test that through different perspectives. Here's the JDR model. We know, in fact, it's the maybe original formats of the JDR, and the job demands, in fact, can increase job strengths and all strength in the workplace, and job resources increase motivation. And this will be the complete, in fact, model that we are going to test. JDR imbalance, dark path variables, and compare that with the effects of the bright path variables. Well, as a significance of the study, what we are going maybe to derive from this thesis is that we can talk and advise organizations in order to help them to assess their practices, to see which one of these practices are working in favor of the dark path, let's say, strategies and factors, and which one of them are working in favor of the bright path, and give them the idea that what is happening inside our organizations. For instance, we have seen it several times that micromanagement, in fact, strategies emphasize on quantity, and it worsens the quality, leading to more reworks, which in fact increases the workloads, and the problem, in fact, becomes more intensified. On the other side, maybe we can implement knowledge management systems, which tries to, in fact, extract the, let's say, implicit knowledge of all employees by sharing knowledge, by making teams and groups working together to find the real causes of the problems in organizations, such as high workloads. And this bright, of course, path can take effect when you, in fact, stop the micromanagement and controlling strategies first, so that they can, in fact, move ahead. Overall, research questions are here. Do dark path variables increase turnover intention more strongly when bright path variables are supposed to decrease it? Considering the dynamics and variability of turnover intention and retention over time using the data in hand, do dark path variables increase turnover intention more strongly than bright path variables can buffer it? When job resources do not suffice to meet job demands, do the organizations tend to implement management practices that increase dark path variables? Here also are 3 studies, and we have a study. One is exploring the dual process model of employee turnover, systematic review meta-analytical approach, where we will be looking at the need for learning and frustration, also the controlled and autonomous motivation, and their link to turnover intention. And of course, the implication of a study 1 would be that it's a novel contribution to the literature of studying, in fact, turnover intention in relation with SDT. And also it will give us some, in fact, insight how to advise organizations based on what has happened in the literature and how to manage and prioritize their practices based on dark path and bright path variables. Here are preliminary research terms that we conducted. And in a study 2, in fact, we will look at the data. The data comes from Federal Employment Viewpoint Survey. There are nearly 50 organizations and much more, in fact, offices and maybe companies related to them from the year 2006 to 2023. And we will be, in fact, looking at the fluctuations in group level work-related need flooding and frustration and the correlation with turnover intention. And also we will be looking at the need support and satisfaction. What we will be, in fact, exactly checking here is that if the dark path variables are increasing, we expect that turnover intention is increasing. And if they are decreasing, we expect the turnover intention to decrease. And if there is a fluctuation, it means that this fluctuation of turnover intention can be traced in the, let's say, fluctuations of the dark path variables. Of course, in this part, because the data set is very large and it has got many different variables, we can even look at the positive outcomes such as retention as well. Here is the data set. Federal Employment Viewpoint Survey from 2006 to 2023. And of course, in the data analysis, we will be using different, let's say, methods such as correlation analysis, regression analysis, descriptive statistics, and other data science methods such as clustering, and of course, maybe decision trees and classification techniques. For the third study, which is examining the impact of job demand resource imbalance on the dark path variables of the dual process model, the data set gives us the possibility in order to find the imbalances between job demands and resources. And we will add these imbalance to the, in fact, what we had in study 2, and in order to examine that whether the increased imbalance between job demands and resources would lead to an increase to the implementation of the dark path variables. And of course, this will have significances such as, in fact, advising organizations to balance their demands and resources more effectively. And also the insight can give us, let's say, an insight on how to prioritize between the allocation of resources to demands so that we will have less dark path variables decreased and also less turnover intention. Study 3 uses the same methods as in study 2, but here we will have discrepancy analysis also to analyze the imbalances between job demands and resources. And here is our thesis outline and timetable, where I will be, in fact, starting to work on my meta-analysis after my CoC for the first year. And there are, of course, overlaps from the review with the study 2 and 3, where I will be, in fact, engaged with dealing with data and maybe choosing which organizations are better in order to detect the clusters. And of course, doing several data analysis techniques to gain the most, let's say, valuable data, whether in terms of the meta-analysis and of course in the study 2 and study 3. Thank you for your attention and thank you for the panel supervisors. And I appreciate your delicate comments on my POC.
So the sound's not quite right there.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna mute this. All right, Baljinder, would you like to take over as chair, please?
Yes, happy to. Thank you, Ricky. Great job, Hamid. That was really nice presentation, very clear. You've done a well job of summarizing your broader theoretical framework and how you're integrating the different theoretical frameworks in weaving together this package of 3 studies. I just have one question for you. The data set that you're using is an American data. And would you be able to say something about the models that you have in your research hypotheses and if they would, if it's appropriate to frame them similarly in a very different culture, for example, a Middle Eastern country or an Asian country, or a country where, and America, as you know, as everyone knows, is a rich country, a democratic country, but there are many nations that have very different political systems, and there are poorer countries, countries with low or middle income countries. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, of course I do have. Mentioning this is one of my concerns because I'm coming from a country that I have seen maybe some of these problems very, in fact, severely, especially about the system thinking. When we started with, in fact, my supervisors panel, we were first, in fact, discussing the problem much more, in fact, complex. We had, in fact, thoughts on how economy affects, for instance, when I am talking about job demand resource model, when your economy is not good, you cannot hire enough forces, and not having enough forces means that higher pressure of workload, and higher workload may lead to more dark path variable. This was the thing that we had started. But the point is that at the moment, we needed a ground in order to say that our, in fact, hypothesis is based on a theory and based on available real data. And after that, we will have, in fact, I didn't present that part here because we are thinking about developing maybe an add-ons which can give us simulation techniques to apply that to the areas that we are having questions. This type of thinking gives us a framework. It does not, in fact, say that just we prove this happening in the United States, including that I really understand that the situation in US is different with other countries, but I think the data set is large enough and there are different organizations, although this is only limited to, in fact, the United States. After that, if we have that, let's say, maybe simulation model, we can help organizations from different countries to collect data. One important problem is how to collect data so that we can test something as a research. I did, in fact, search for a long time, but I didn't really find data for other countries. And the problem, as far as I thought, is that they don't know how to collect data because they don't have a model to fit and put the data in.
I just wanted to know your thinking, whether the theoretical model would similarly apply there. I completely understand the practical constraints, and it's well outside the scope of your PhD to have that, so collect that sort of data if it's not already available. I understand that. I just wanted to know whether you're in your thinking, whether you think it's easy to just apply. This is not unique to your study. This is actually a common problem in psychology, that 96% of the psychological insights come from the knowledge that's generated by 12% of the world's population. And that there's, weird population, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. And so we kind of have to think about that. And it's not entirely clear to me that insights from your study can be easily applied in that domain.
For that
That's
sense,
okay. That's okay. I understand the constraint, the practical constraints. Yeah. And I just wanted to have your thinking about it and possibly open your mind to sort of think maybe more along those lines and see how, when the time comes to generalize the results of your finding and to say that this is actually universally applicable human phenomena, perhaps some humility is needed at that time. And even in the document that you submitted, some of the statements, and it's actually throughout the document, it comes across as it's a done deal, we understand, and this is the truth, believe it. So they need to be kind of toned down a little bit, I think, in the context of all of that. Okay, I'll invite other panel members. Kim, did you have any questions for Hamid?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Hamad, for your document and your presentation. And I do tend to agree with some of the comments that Chinda's just made. I did find your presentation clarified some things for me that weren't in the document. And just to pick up on, I guess, the point, for me, there were lots of things I didn't know what the FEBS was. And I was asking myself, is it US or Australian? Like, what is it? So you answered it in your presentation, but not in your document, right? I would just say all of those key concepts and terms and things really need to be very clear in documentation. There were, to me, when I read it, a lot of assumptions sitting underneath your theoretical choices. And I could see why I thought they were there, but to me, it wasn't fully explicated why those two theories and how do they apply, right? You did talk to that more in your presentation, but I would just say be aware there are a lot of assumptions and assumed knowledge, certainly in your writing. And I think for other people like me who are not involved, we would sort of be there going, well, but why? Why those theories? And what is it that sits under them that you're applying to your hypotheses? So, and again, I found your presentation helped me understand that a bit more. But I did wonder, and you did answer this a bit in your presentation, but not really in the document. Why those two theories to this problem?
Of course, it's a very, in fact, nice question that why we are choosing these, in fact, theories. Of course, in my presentation, I'm saying why SDT, because I explained that SDT is something that benefits organizations and, of course, the employee together, because it links, in fact, the benefits of organizations to motivation, and motivation is, in fact, described by, in fact, let's say SDT. But about the point that the JDR, why am I using JDR and linking that to SDT? What we have is very novel, as you saw, in fact, in the paper by MED was the inspiration for us. And of course, in fact, in the real world, when we talk to an organization and we tell them that, why are you, in fact, imposing controlling strategies to your employees, they will say that because we have got, in fact, insufficient resources to assign to, in fact, demands. So it tells us that when managers do not have enough resources, are they allowed to impose more controlling strategies? This was the thing that I had in mind, and I found, in fact, the literature of MED, and I was inspired to link these two theories and go for the turnover intention. Of course, in fact, focusing on employee turnover, especially in focusing on the dark path variables, the literature has got so many gaps. And I thought maybe, in fact, starting from SDT and linking that to JDR makes sense, as I have some, let's say, proof or at least hints from the recent literature. And of course, intuitionistically, we can see that it works in the real world.
Okay, well, thank you. That's, to me, it sounds very risky, right? There's a lot of hypothesizing going on. And you may be aware, I do a lot of work with healthcare organisations and measure turnover and tension, etc., in nursing. And I think your theories address some of the issues that create turnover. I don't think they address all of them. And you've mentioned that in your document, but just, it will be very interesting to see what you find. I think the bright path and dark path variables are very interesting. And I guess my other question, which you've sort of answered in the appendix in your document, was what are the items that you're going to select out of that database that will address the dark path and the bright path variables, right? I wasn't clear when I read it what specific things you were going to draw out of that database.
Yes, maybe we have to, in fact, think about more details to, in fact, complement both our, of course, document, and also think in more details of how they can address the problem. Yeah, you are right, and maybe giving more examples that what inspired us in the document.
Yeah.
Like, of course, we did work about that. Maybe, I don't know if you have time or not. We had nurses, especially for nurses. Yeah, there are lots of problems. For instance, we started the problem of turnover intention in nurses from the population aging. Even we had talked about that. Yeah, when we have a, let's say, community that people are aging, it means that you will have more work of health. It means workloads, and the workloads may lead to dark path variables. But what we just tried in order to focus on the part that is working in organizations, and we can manipulate that, because we couldn't manipulate anything or anything about or maybe the whole community. But we know that the problem is very complex, and we have the complex models, and maybe I will present them to you to see that.
That's good.
Very complex, big model.
I understand. But you're tackling a big issue. You're tackling a very big issue, right? And your theoretical models, which are sophisticated, won't address all the factors, right? It's sort of a piece of the puzzle from my perspective. But thank you. I just wanted to flag that, because for me, what was missing in your document was the significance of it all, right? What does this mean? What does it mean internationally and nationally, etc.? And so you did answer a lot of that in your presentation. But thank you. As I said, very sophisticated, interesting theoretical models. But I would just encourage you to think further about, explaining them to other people and rationalising them, I guess.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for your comments. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah. Joseph, did you have any comments or questions for
just
Hamid?
a couple of questions. So thank you for that. That was really good. I guess focusing on some statistical questions. So that job demand resource hypothesis that's pretty central to the field, it implies an interaction. And I didn't understand how you were whether you were testing an interaction or not. So it implies that if you have enough resources, really having more and more demands, as long as it's below those resources, won't affect your well-being. Somebody else might hypothesize, well, just increasing demand is going to be more stressful, even if you have a load of resources. So my first question is, is there an interaction test between demand and resources predicting thwarting? Because the idea would be that demand, for example, one way to phrase it is demand doesn't have a negative effect until it exceeds resources, which is an interaction effect.
Yes, of course, what I have in mind is just finding the gap between resources and, of course, demand. But we will be looking at the, in fact, buffering effects as well as, in fact, looking into the interactions in the, in fact, third study as well. But in fact, precisely, we can say that we will be, in fact, using the, in fact, discrepancy analysis, in which I think the interaction effects at the moment. To the best of knowledge so far, I know that interactions are dealt with in discrepancy analysis.
So, okay, so I mean, if you're going to use the word balance, right, there has to be an interaction.
Yes.
So that model is not supported if there's not a significant interaction between resources and demands. If it's just main effects, for example, more resources are good, less demands are good, which is what you'll find that. But it's not a balance. The word balance is not necessary if there's no interaction.
So you mean you want us to, in order to think about the term balance?
Well, what does it mean, like in terms of your hypothesis and your statistical test? Does it have any meaning other than, are you just saying it's good to have more resources and fewer demands? Or are you actually saying, hey, as long as you have a heap of resources, you can keep upping demands as long as it doesn't exceed, as long as it doesn't get out of balance? I mean, I guess I think that's one of the core, more interesting questions.
Yeah, what we are going to say is that first detect that how, in fact, resources are not sufficient for demands, okay, and help organization to prioritize them. That's a point that when, in fact, resources are, let's say, more than demands or something like that, how do they affect each other as interaction? That will be something that, in fact, would complement and make our research richer. But at the point of now, we are thinking about that, or we are, in fact, saying, try to allocate resources, in fact, more wisely to demands so that dark path variables are not implemented more strongly. And of course, considering the interaction between resources and demands can be very nice to think about in order to have in our study, of course.
Okay. I guess it's just a matter of thinking about that word balance, but that's fine. I'll move on. Just one other question. You mentioned that you're going to be using machine learning and decision trees, and I just wondered how those statistics help you to address your question compared to, say, more traditional regression types.
I had in mind, for instance, we've got different organizations and we have the data for more than 10 years. First, we can classify organizations based on the level of turnover intentions, and of course, based on the level of dark path and bright path variables. Having this, in fact, clustering gives us an insight that how, in fact, different organizations are. And of course, about maybe other techniques, maybe about turnover intention, what I had in mind is that we can say the decision tree, how they are dividing or how different levels and groups of people are at the stake of turnover intention by separating them based on a decision tree. For instance, the ones who are, let's say, having more, in fact, job experience, for instance, 20 years of experience, how are they, in fact, moving toward turnover intention while we have, let's say, newcomers to the organization, and how they are, in fact, thinking about turnover intention.
Okay.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience here? Karen?
Thanks for your presentation. I have two questions, but they are related. The first one is, you mentioned that your hypothesis is a dual process.
Dual process model, yeah.
But I'm not sure it is really a dual process model because in SPT, actually first time bright process was proposed time, but SPT proposed darker process because in order to explain darker process better, so which means tangent both process, dark and dark process and bright process, both process predict their unique outcomes. So bright process predict a bright outcome, and dark process predict dark outcome. So you proposed only the dark outcome, and also I remember that in your study 3, you also suggested one what was the imbalance or something?
Yeah,
Was the antecedent of your process as antecedent? So I'm not sure this is really true process model. And the other one is why are you interested in the dark outcome, negative outcome? For example, in education, well-being is of course important. However, we're more focusing on well-being because yeah, we can reduce negative outcomes, but increasing positive outcome is more important, like increasing well-being. So why we don't you are not focusing on job retention rather than
Yeah. Firstly, in the second study, in fact, the data says we are focusing on retention as well as employee turnover. Yeah. But in the first study, as I said, there are lots of studies, in fact, focusing on the bright path. And the novelty, of course, goes with the employee turnover that has not been researched. And of course, according to what we think that we need in organization to advise them, because in fact, many organizations are applying or do have some programs in order to, let's say, improve well-being. But the question is that at the same time, maybe they are not giving up or they have not assessed the path that is, in fact, weakening the effect of their bright path. This is something that helps them more. And in order to give them the hints by this, in fact, thesis that go and assess your dark path, because we think that that's, in fact, the research gap now, and which benefits them more. And of course, means that we have to stop first dark path so that the, in fact, bright path can take effect. If not, maybe we will have a mixture of effects of both sides, and of course, it seems that we cannot expect to improve, in fact, or decrease the turnover intention if not focusing on the dark path. Mostly, I want to say that because of the need, the research need, we are focusing on dark path.
Any other questions? Audience, any questions from the online? No, so I think that's it. Anything else, Bojinder? Otherwise, I will close this up.
I think we should just, the panel should meet now, just us.
All right, so thank you very much, Hamed. Could you please give me another round of applause? Well done. Next, I'll ask the panel to stay on and deliberate. And thank you very much, and have a great afternoon, everyone. All right.
Are we able to stop the recording now?